Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, considering the Red Raider passing game in 2024. Dudes or duds? We're into it next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And thanks as always for making us your first listen. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. With the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to be back with you, and we are wrapping up the week, keeping the pass catcher vibes alive. We talked tight ends just a few days ago, and I wanted to attack some questions and considerations as it relates to those on the outside who are also hoping to develop that chemistry with Baron Morton as we get into 2024. And we may say this about a couple of different positional groups because I think there's quite a bit to be interested in, really in multiple spots on both sides of the ball. But your group of wide receivers is one of those that's going to be paid the closest attention to, I think, because of how not quite on track you got a year ago, at least not in a consistent form or fashion. Obviously, we've been a little bit spoiled over the years as Red Raider football fans, expecting a passing game to just kind of be plug and play. Here we go. And while you had some good things going last year, we've well documented on this program, you were nowhere near as dynamic or explosive as obviously you would hope to be. So you go pursue some explosiveness via the transfer portal, by a high school class as well. And we hope that some of those things have been added. We'll get into some of what has been added and how it could or couldn't impact the offensive identity in 2024. But I'm kind of curious, as you tried to renovate that group, Chris, much easier said than done, but I wonder where you kind of feel or how you kind of feel after now the dust is settled and the additions that have been made, because they said they wanted to do it. And I think in large part, without seeing a game played yet, they did go do it. I mean, really, you checked some of these boxes as far as what you wanted to add to that group, again, whether through the portal or through a recruiting class. So I don't know about you, but I'm considering, at least on paper, that to have been a success this offseason. It was a priority, looked like a priority. And I think you went out and did just about the best you could in changing the game as far as the explosiveness among those wide receivers. How do you feel about that so far?
Well, and you mentioned that there was we are spoiled, and that's true. But I think another way to say that is there's a standard that's been set, and last year's group did not meet that. It just didn't, and it's not. I mean, there's a variety of reasons why. Did we overrate that group individually? Did quarterback play or injury factor into that? Did lack of consistent offensive line play factor into that? And I think all contributed. But I think that you hate to be like this, but really most of the blame goes on the position group for, and again, not necessarily their fault in some cases, but for not being as explosive as you needed to be. There was some drops, and there was obviously some inconsistency at quarterback, and then just once Barron gets in there, I can't throw the ball down the field. I can't throw that route, and that obviously causes some problems as well. But then there were some plays that some of these kids made that are no longer here, like in the Kansas game, that I think is a reason why you won it. So right. you have to be careful about. But I think that people need to remember that there's a lengthy list of guys that either graduated or transferred out from just this particular position group, not including tight ends, not including, running back / receiver. No, just strictly outside receiver type players or slots. And I mean, Miles Price out, Xavier White graduates, Jerron Bradley transfers to Boston College, Loic Fungi transfers to Vandy, J.J. Sparkman transfers to UTSA. Nehemiah Martinez transfers to ACU. I mentioned Miles Price. He's in Indiana. That's a lot going on there of exiting. I think the hardest guy maybe to replace of that group is arguably Xavier White, because he had at or near the lead in catches, okay, as for the team. And then he was, based on the number of catches he got, he was also like the clear cut leader in yards per catch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because he could break tackles. It's because there were some yards after the catch and that's what just fell way short of. This is something you and I would talk about almost every Sunday in games that you struggled offensively. Like, look at the lack of plays that are being made by that particular group and how few of yards you're gaining after the ball is possessed. And it's maddening. It's just, and that's the part that needed to get better. And I think if you talk about, did you upgrade? And that's where I think you feel like you added some juice is what you added. And that's the part that needed to be upgraded mightily.
Wasn't always a blank or always a dud. It kind of just, when you're describing what you're describing there, I'm thinking, yeah, sounds like about a 6-6 football team, like one component of a 6-6 football team. And that sometimes you'd see some things and you'd say, man, I want a lot more of that. And then you don't get a lot more of that. And by the way, shout out to Xavier White. Of course, always loving to see a headline that says local boy makes good. And he is the son of the LBK, and saw him having a send-off party this week at a local restaurant as he's headed off to camp with the Indianapolis Colts. So we'll be rooting for him. And yeah, by the end of the season, he was the guy you looked at and thought, I'd like to have more touches for that dude, because he was your yards after catch guy. He was the guy that could make a little bit of something out of almost nothing whenever the ball did eventually get to his hands. And I don't know, necessarily what the case was for some of the others as to why you couldn't. Miles Price, I always thought was a guy that could be that. Obviously, he had some injury issues and things like that kind of get in his way. And then we can't discount, so I'm glad you mentioned it, you just can't discount how difficult it is to establish those types of things when you got, new faces at the quarterback position. And like I said on a previous show earlier in the week, not just a new face from week to week or maybe month to month, but practice time. Monday through Friday, it's probably one guy who's putting it in the air. And then your starter on Saturday is a guy that you hadn't seen do that Monday through Friday. So there were quite a few layers, obviously, to the issues that impacted these guys. But it was a priority this offseason. And Chris, whether it is because of some of the names that left the program or just because of what the return was last year, not being what you wanted it to be, is it extreme to say it was priority number one? Was it at the very top of the list as far as upgrading some personnel, or where would you slot it among some other needs?
First, today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Never sweat buying tickets to your favorite events again with Gametime. It's always a breeze using the Gametime app, where you're going to find the best last-minute deals. And I love being able to scout out a view from any seat before pulling the trigger. And of course, it's always at the lowest price, guaranteed. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it begins, which means you can finish off that last beer at the tailgate at your own pace, because Gametime is the place to find last-minute seats to any event. They give you the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets, but not just fast and easy, also secure and simple to use. So right now, download the Gametime app and create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today for last-minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed.
Is it extreme to say it was priority number one? Was it at the very top of the list as far as upgrading some personnel, or where would you slot it among some other needs?
Man, I haven't been asked that directly the way you just phrased it, but boy, I mean, based on the number of exits, that necessitated it to be. I mean, I think it's probably at or near the top, though. Yeah, because I just think that you needed an upgrade. You just did. It was very pedestrian, yeah. And I think you again, a standard here, and it just did. And there were some flashes shown. I mean, Miles and Bradley, but what makes guys that we were used to seeing, we talked about Danny Amendola recently going in the Hall of Fame. What made guys like that so good is that they didn't show up and then disappear. It was consistently good. And that's what makes that's the hardest thing to do, especially when everybody knows, okay, well, the ball's going to this guy, and but you still make plays. And that's what some of those guys that have come before, able to put a lot of consistency together. And that's what we just didn't see, because you saw flashes from Miles and Bradley. Loic was somebody that probably had a bigger impact on special teams last year as much as anything.
Jordan Brown, who got kind of derailed injury-wise. I mean, flashes there.
Yeah, and he's one that, we'll get into a little bit, that I think there was some – I just remember early on in that West Virginia game before Tyler got hurt, he missed Jordan Brown on a deep ball, and Jordan was open. And it just threw it – just wasn't quite right, and you end up punting, and then like a series or two later, Tyler Shuck's season would come to an end. But that's kind of the way that there's a lot of plays like that, almost, almost. Or we're going to call a play for Dre. He's wide open, and protection won't hold up, and we don't have enough time to launch it. That happened more than once, or fairly early on in the season. And it's like we got him, and then he's just ready to, and you just don't have time to let it develop to throw it out there because you got pressure, and then you get scrambled and all those things. But yeah, there was a big need to upgrade this position, and you maybe went and got one of the best players on your team in the portal, and that's why I feel so good about this group in general, because you went and got a bona fide, consistent playmaker, and those are hard to find.
Man, before we get into some of the personnel that's on campus right now and going to be there in 2024, just going back to the word spoiled or the word standard, I'm just thinking, how the hell did we used to pull off having double 1,000-yard receivers, maybe approaching triple 1,000-yard receivers? I don't know if we ever crossed the 3 1,000-yard receiver threshold, but there was a time where it was almost feeling like a given that you're going to have 2 guys cross that number. You think about some of those receiving cores with guys like Filani or Robert Johnson involved at the same time, and obviously you can sub in and sum out some of those names that go well beyond just those years. How the hell did we pull that off? They made it look so easy, and credit to Mike Leach and the offensive line and the quarterbacks and everybody involved for making it look that way. But man, that seems like a long road to hoe nowadays. And I do feel spoiled that at one time I thought, yep, plug and play, double it up, Bolitnikovs, all of the above, man. That was just wild to watch, and I'm glad I got to enjoy it for at least the time I did.
and then you see last year like how the other half lives.
That's right.
And it makes you realize that it's not as easy as some folks, and play calls and quarterback play, all of that factoring in made it look. And it just makes everything harder, right? It makes everything more difficult, whether it's whatever you're doing. It's just it makes you beat your head against the wall, because nothing is coming easy. We can't score easy. We're having to grind. Then you
Longer
factor
drives,
in turnovers and penalties and all the bad things that happen when you have to execute, 12 to 13 to 14 plays in a drive. There's just a lot that bad that can happen. And, whereas, because I looked up some of these numbers, and just the point that we're making here, this is a bit sobering. Okay. You were tied for 72nd in the country in 10 plus play passing yard plays. Okay. Wow. So plays of 10 yards or more that were passing. You were tied for 80th in the country when you move that number to 20, tied for 71st when you move to 30 plus, tied for 101st when you go to 40 plus, and then tied for 118th when you go to 50 plus. You just had one such play there all season long.
All right, I'm sober. I'm sober enough I could preach a sermon right now.
But this is, this was really so much of what ailed you in a nutshell. And then we already knew the long rushing plays too. It was a similar theme.
True.
And that's why we talked about the Cameron Valdez and his explosiveness and some different things last year. Why Dre McCray and all this juice that you hoped that you'd added, and it just didn't happen for you. And so you've gone to the well again. And I just know Josh Kelly, the long pass play for him last year, 51-yarder versus Colorado. Caleb Douglas, he had a 46-yarder versus the University of Kentucky last year. This is why they're here, folks. This is exactly why they're here. Freaking Micah Hudson averaged 20 yards a catch basically in high school. Okay. This is what I'm talking about. Yeah. This is, you trying to make a fancy soup here. And these are the ingredients you're mixing in here.
Spice, dynamite, and a pinch more of spice. So you named some of the names there. I mean, I really, going back to what you just said a minute ago, did you possibly, out of this group, add the best player to your team overall? I kind of wonder, looking back at some gets for anybody and everybody in the Big 12 or nationally, if you wanted to talk about a transfer wide receiver or a high school wide receiver that you added to the roster, I think Texas Tech would be in pretty elite company when talking about Josh Kelly, talking about Micah Hudson. And some of these things, Chris, talent only takes you so far. Obviously, you've got to establish synergy with your quarterback and your offense and put yourself in a position to be able to let that talent do some things for you. But I don't know that I would look elsewhere. There were other needs. There were other priorities. There were other positional groups that were impacted by the transfer portal where you wanted to really bring some guys in. But I don't know if there was a bigger talent upgrade, again, without seeing a snap yet in 2024. We're talking on paper, but I don't know anywhere else on the team that I would consider there to have been a bigger talent upgrade than what we're talking about with these wide receivers. And I wouldn't leave Douglas out of that either, but obviously really focusing in on Kelly and Hudson in that regard.
Yeah, because Josh Kelly is as close to a first-team All-Big 12 guy as you have on your team because of what he has already done at this level in college and done it multiple places and done it consistently. 61 catches for just under 1,000 yards. I think he knows his craft. I mean, he's got a chance to play at the next level. This was not an easy get, but I think you had, some ends based on some relationships and things like that. But he kind of walks in with a ton of street cred, just because he's done it. And there's just not – it's kind of like remember – the last guy that I think that you added that was similar that had street cred like this was Colin Schooler because of what he had done at University of Arizona.
Turned out pretty good.
And that's exactly right. And that's why my expectations are so high for a guy like Josh because, again, he knows how to run routes. He knows how to be a college guy. It's really just about staying healthy and all those things. And when you start to hear some things about him mentoring – or being great for somebody like Micah Hudson to learn under, that should give you the warm and fuzzies right there, because that's exactly the way it's supposed to work. That means not only is he taking care of his business and being a playmaker and all those things, but he's also kind of paying it forward and kind of being a good example for what younger and inexperienced guys would want to look at. But I'm as excited to watch him, speaking of Josh Kelly, as anybody on your team, just because he's ready-made. And there's just not much of that you ever have been able to add to your program. It's always like hope, or maybe if he stays healthy, or maybe he blossoms, or maybe he needed to change his scenery. I mean, all that stuff, right? And this is as close to a sure thing as you're going to find. Not that it is. I don't know if you can guarantee 1,000 yards, but I bet he's heard from on most Saturdays, and I bet he's, if not your leader, you're right there between 1 and 2 on leading receivers for the season when all is said and done, assuming he stays healthy enough to play in most of the games. And then with Micah, from a recruit, being a 5-star type guy, that's as close as you can get to a sure thing from a high school prospect. It just is. That's part of the label that comes with how few 5-star rankings go out to high school prospects. It's almost as if they're saying, we think that this is a person that has a chance to play at the next level. We already feel this way. We're only given, 20 to 30 of these out across the country. He was tabbed with that, and that, at worst, it equals a pretty good college career. Now we'll see how quickly it takes him to adapt and all that. But, those are a fun pair of additions for sure.
I guess one thing I'm wondering as well, because it's not going to be like, hey, you kick it off August 31st, first offensive series, first offensive plays. All right, 4 new wide receivers, get in there. Guys like Coy Aiken, Dre McCray, Jordan Brown, guys who did make some impact a season ago, obviously are going to figure in. I'm sure some of them will be starters alongside some of these newcomers. But I wonder, just as an example, what that addition does for guys like that. And the example being like a Coy Aiken, and McCray may fit in this as well. What that could open up for them to really play their role and not maybe have to kind of be outside of that or asked to do everything as a wide receiver. There's some complementary nature to a position group like this, obviously, just like we talk about, with some others where one guy doing a certain things a certain way opens up opportunity for another guy to kind of complement that. And I do think about Dre McCray. I mean, we know he's got explosiveness. We saw it mostly in special teams as a returner last year, but we know he can be explosive. And I do think Aiken can also be, if he can stay healthy, a reliable guy as well. But some of that is diminished whenever a defense can, in large part, almost entirely focus on those guys, at least, again, from defending a pass catcher standpoint. And so I'm kind of wondering how you see those additions maybe impacting those guys and the opportunity that they might get as compared to what we saw a season ago.
Yeah, because of all these guys we're sitting here talking about, only Micah Hudson is younger than Coy Aiken. I mean, Coy Aiken's just a sophomore, and or is only supposed to be a sophomore this next year. And he's one of the best, I guess, pure football players you have on your team. He's just good at everything. He's tough. He's reliable. I would have told you that I think the receiving core last year would have been much different had he not missed the first month. And we have to remember that, because whenever you talk to people about what was going on in August, he was lighting it up until he took that fall and broke that other collarbone, that set him back. And then he missed the 6 weeks or whatever it was. And then it took him a while to reacclimate and get back in. But I mean, you're talking about somebody that caught 36 passes and missed several games. But I think he had a really good chemistry going with Tyler Shuck and down the field and all the stuff. But, Coy is athletic. He's tough. He runs routes good. I mean, he blocks well. I mean, he's not necessarily a burner, but it's like I think of like Alex Torres and Austin Zuzalik and some of the receivers you've had over the years, and like Danny Amendola. I mean, and Coy's a bit bigger than a lot of those guys were, but that's the same kind of mold to where it's so reliable. Third down, this is where I'm going. If I just need 4 yards, I know he's going to be past the sticks. And
finished the season strong too, man. He really, I thought, had a great second half and finish of the year.
In the bowl game too. I mean, just was really good. And I think you're just starting to see him scratch the surface. Jordan Brown's still got a lot of big playmaking ability. I think that these other guys around him makes him that much more dangerous. And it's just about consistency and staying healthy. And the same thing, I think, with a guy like Dre. I think that Dre can maybe show you a few more things now that there's some folks around him that can extend the field and all that, because there's a lot of guys on your team that you almost want to. Dre was the manufactured touch guy last year, and I think now he will be in that kind of category a little bit, but also Micah Hudson is in that category as well, where you just want to hand it to him, throw it to him on a short, pitch it to him. I don't know, whatever. But and the guy we haven't talked a lot about that is maybe the most intriguing or the biggest unknown is a guy like Caleb Douglas, because of how limited he was last year because of an injury. But as far as upside goes, because this is the stretch the field guy, this is the burner, and he did it in the spring. I mean, he looks like a University of Florida football player, 6'4", 205, and he can run. And I think that helps take the top off and helps everybody around him as well.
And I'm in a different office today, but for some reason I'm hearing that same damn buzz in the background saying, jet sweep, jet sweep, call the jet sweep. It's getting louder and louder and louder. Chris, you've already mentioned the word that I want to kind of root our final phase of the conversation in, because I also want to ask about offensive identity. To me, until proven otherwise, it is a Taj Brooks offensive identity. It is a physical, ball-carrying centered offensive identity. And maybe we learn by the time we're in October or something like that, that either you can be more balanced or maybe even slant more toward being a passing centered offensive identity. But to start the year, it's still kind of a Brooks or bust thing for me, but that's just for me. So do you think that we should have some type of expectation to see an altered kind of identity right out of the gates? Is it going to be a kind of work your way into it? And the word you mentioned that I'm really interested in is blocking, because that's what I'm curious about with this group. And that's what, going back to the era that we've already mentioned, the era of the Afros, America's finest receivers on Saturday, they took great pride in how physical they were and what they could do from a blocking standpoint. And that's not just based in the ground game. I mean, you're blocking for your fellow receivers, the horizontal passing game, the bubble screens, things like that, obviously heavily rely on that. So I'm just curious about sort of the physical aspect of these really talented guys and maybe what you think we might see out of the gates as far as a continuation of the identity from where you were a season ago. Ball carrier with one of the highest numbers of carries in the country, maybe number one, I'm not sure. Or do we see maybe something a little more balanced or even wanting to dabble in something more pass-centric when we kick things off at the end of next month?
I hope the identity changes. I'm going to be really disappointed if it doesn't, to be honest with you. I think that only helps Taj, because I think what are teams going to do early on in the season to try to defend you? They know what you have at running back. I mean, they're, and you just, we keep mentioning that word versatility, and you've got to be able to beat teams different ways and all that. You couldn't beat teams really throwing the football last year consistently, like good teams.
Yeah,
you had to try to do that running it and all that, and you've got to be able to have that component to you, and the explosiveness and the flip the field and all the things that come with a big passing game. But I think that, I mean, what was Barron doing in that first tweet when we were like, "Whoa, look at this, he's back"? I mean, how far was that ball thrown?
He was chucking yards? He was chucking. It wasn't a handoff.
No, and there needs to be some of that. It only helps everybody. I hope somebody's on the other end and there to catch it. But that's really what you're working towards. It's balance. It's not. I don't think you're going into this thing being like, we want to be much more pass heavy. In fact, we want to major in it or anything. I think it's clearly balanced, but you want to be able to hit teams in different ways depending on how they are defending you. Hopefully, you have tweaked the personnel enough and the quarterback stays healthy enough to where you can do that. But I look at and when we kind of blend these two position groups together a little bit, but I just think about, we recently talked about John Carlos Miller and Jalen Conyers and all that, and you factor that in with Caleb Douglas and Micah Hudson and Josh Kelly and all that. There's just too much playmaking and down the field and too much proven in college not to, and I think it only helps Taj. That loosens things up, and that's what I think that he needs some of that. You can't hand it to this kid 25, 30 times a game and expect positive results. I mean, I think you're going to get diminishing returns, and I just don't think that that's what will work, because as much as he may be able to handle it, it's not really fair to him either. I think that, so I'm hopeful that it's a lot more balanced out of the gate, because I just think that's what teams are going to ultimately try to take away a bit early on. And so some of these throws should be there.
Well, and you got me thinking about, fatigue and wear and tear, not only as the game goes along, but as the season goes along. And we know when the weather changes, you get later into the year, offense is tightening up a little bit, particularly maybe a passing game tightening up a little bit. And you still want Taj Brooks to be at his best, whatever that may look like by that point in time, because I know he's not going to be shying away from contact earlier in the year. But you can only really give yourself that chance if you do have some balance to the offense. I'm really excited about this group, man. I kind of feel like as a fan, I'm coming out of an era or a window where that was one of the groups I was typically maybe most down on, or kind of skeptical of the ability to really meet that standard, again, that we've referenced already on the program today. So you've got some new opportunity. You've got some potential. We'll see what they're able to do with that. Let's reconvene, like I said, in October, and we'll chop it up again and see how it's gone so far. But, man, I'm excited about that potential, to say the least.
Absolutely. Me too, man. Well, yeah, it's fun talking perceived upgrades for sure.
Yeah.
Because if it was a huge question mark, boy, it would kind of, it'd be one of those things where if you're holding your, holding your breath a little bit on this group, I wouldn't feel near as optimistic, but I really feel like you drastically upgraded, not just a little bit. And there's the huge unknown of Micah Hudson and what it could be. And I think you'll see flashes. I think that we have to be careful about expecting too much too soon, but I just think he's different. I mean, he is different, and that's why they label guys like that with that prospect rating, and for good reason. So, but hopefully everybody, dreams about, long passing plays this weekend. But happy Friday, folks, and we enjoyed it.
And yeah, just hold on to your butts because we'll have some of those kind of hoping against hope conversations as we continue to swing around both sides of the ball and taking a look at some personnel. But this is one of the more exciting ones, obviously, as we get closer to fall camp and closer to the season. Appreciate your time as always, Chris. Appreciate you guys for being out there. Make sure you get subscribed on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. And of course, one of the best ways to help us grow the show is to comment anything below. Thanks to those everydayers making us their first listen. And for your second listen, check out Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts as well. For Chris, I'm Casey. Thanks for being out there, and we hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.